The seven seals of Revelation. The third seal, in Revelation chapter 6, verse 5 and 6. The third seal is also 2 verses long. In verse 5, "And when he had opened the third seal, I heard a third beast say, Come and see. And I beheld, and lo, a black horse. And he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. And see thou hurt not the oil and the wine." At a glance, it might as well be understood as some kind of a famine. There appears a pair of balances, and also presented to us is a prices for the groceries. A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. A penny in KJV is a translation for units of denarius in Greek, which is usually referred to as daily wages earned by a single laborer. So if you would translate this into our currency, then a person would earn a minimum $40 for a full day work, calculated at a minimum wage. Sounds about right. But for $40, one could only get a measure of wheat or 3 measures of barley, which is a pretty small amount. So we can imagine the shortage or how poor the condition is in this passage. This is why everyone concurred with the conventional assumption that the verses described a famine. Do you remember from our lecture on the first seal, how the passage in Matthew 24 spoken by Jesus is understood by many as matching the events of the first 3 seals of Revelation? And from the assumed structural parallelism, because Jesus spoke in the order of the false prophet, the wars and rumors of wars, and followed by the famine, people just too easily accepted the logic without questioning. And so far, I haven't discovered a single person or commentary that challenged the conventional understanding on this passage. But I had an ample questions in my mind. If this is indeed the famine, why does it say not to hurt the oil and the wine? I mean, do you know of any famine or drought where the wheat and barley are devastated while the oil and wine remain intact? I'm not a farmer, but I don't think this is even possible. And I'm still certain that a biblical proportion of famine prophesied in the book of Revelation would not have been lenient on any crops, grains, fruits, vegetables, roots, cattle, you name it. So I had begun my research, starting with the historical famines happening around the 11th century. This was because I have speculated the fourth seal to have started sometime during the 13th century with the expansion of Mongol Empire by Genghis Khan. So naturally, if famine occurred, it had to have happened in pre-Genghis Khan era. This interpretation of third seal being famine has been standing for a long time, but it is probably incorrect because there seems to be a discrepancy in our understanding of the descriptions. Historically, famines were frequent, but severity was and is a different matter. And as a matter of fact, major famines are also recorded before 11th century. However, John has used the word famine or hunger in the fourth seal. If the third seal were in fact another famine or hunger, why wouldn't he use the same word to describe it in the third seal? Doesn't this puzzle you also? I mean, there were a series of events happening in the fourth seal, like the sword, hunger, death, and the beast of the earth. Yet John didn't forget to accurately capture the vision that he saw with the word hunger to describe what was going on in the fourth seal. And if this word were to accurately capture what was going on in the third seal, wouldn't he have done the same and used the word hunger to describe it? That's my question. If you look over the parts of the passage again, there appears a pair of balances in the hand of the rider on the black horse, and there are mentioned a measure of wheat for a penny and 3 measures of barley for a penny. And you'll be prone to think that balances are needed in times of famine because the merchant would want to get paid more for less amount he gives out, while the buyer will want to walk away with accurate amount of what he pays, if not more. But it brings you back to the same question. If this really were a famine, would a region produce wheat and barley while not producing oil and wine at all? Is this even reasonable, let alone its possibility? With the common sense, this question didn't seem to make any sense. My instinct told me that if wheat and barley were to be produced in a region, oil and wine probably would have been produced as well. Furthermore, a country or nation wouldn't have chosen to cultivate only grain over vineyards or vice versa, especially during the old times where the trading or transportation for that matter, was not as efficient or effective as today. So a part of my research included searching for countries or regions that would strategically cultivate only the grains over vineyards or vineyards over the croplands. And if you research the farming conditions of the Mediterranean countries like Greece, you'll soon find out that your common sense was correct all along. Look at this website on the farming in ancient Greece. It states word for word that main crops were barley, grapes, and olives. They planted them together, grew them together, harvested together in the same country. Of course they did. So it was not a famine. At least, it wasn't an ordinary kind. The olives, grapes, wheat, and barley always constitute basic Mediterranean crops. It is needless to repeat this. And the other question that persisted was, why does it say not to hurt the oil and the wine? If olives and grapes were produced, why were they not hurt? And what does it mean by hurt? If my olives and grapes ripened well and were harvested just fine, I would not in my right mind deliberately hurt them or destroy them. So what kind of warning was this to not hurt the oil and the wine? That was basically the question. It was like a strange riddle that demanded for right answers. So I ended up looking up this word for hurt. In Greek, it was adikeo, and it had the following listed under its definitions. In an absolute sense, it meant to act unjustly or wickedly, to sin, to be a criminal, to have violated the laws in some way, to do wrong, to do hurt. Transitively, it means to do some wrong or sin in some respect, to wrong someone, act wickedly toward him, to hurt, damage, harm. Having read through the definitions, are you slowly getting the idea of what this word really means? Verse 6 can be interpreted to mean that the oil and wine harvests are in good shape, but for some of you, they are not allowed to be violated. If you touch them, then you will be criminalized for wronging the items. Are you following? The word adikeo is a verb, and it comes from the root word adikos, which is an adjective. The adjective is used to describe one who violates or has violated justice, to mean unjust, unrighteous, sinful, dealing fraudulently with others. Perhaps we can now duly attempt at interpreting the verse. And see thou hurt not the oil and the wine. This probably means that some people were not allowed access to oil and wine, and if they attempted to possess or consume oil or wine, then such act must have been deemed sinful, unrighteous, and violating some kind of prohibitive regulation. So now we can imagine a scenario where there are people of lower class who are not privileged enough to have or consume the oil and wine, where there are these groups belonging to the higher class have no limitations or restrictions for indulging in the oil and wine. So understanding this aspect of definition of hurt made me question if there was such a political or societal discrimination against certain group of people before the 13th century. But my questions were not fully answered yet, because I couldn't make any use of pair balances in this scenario. Why was it needed, and why was it important to be noted here? Because this pair of balances naturally makes reader to relate the third seal to about rationing of scarce food supplies, doesn't it? The instantaneous feeling I get from the pair of balances is far from an idea of being generous. So this description seems to fit both of the following situations. One was the rationing of food during a famine, but we already overruled the famine as one of the possible or likely interpretation. And secondly, a situation where restricting the supply of oil and wine against a certain group of people was a social standard or widely accepted. This makes sense because the passage uses penny or denarius to describe some kind of restrictions against laborers that became the social standard. We cannot but conclude that the passage has something to do with the laborers and their wages. And we speculate that it is possibly implying that the laborers are working very hard all day long, yet only to receive a measure of wheat and or 3 measures of barley for their payment. The truth is, it is probably the same laborers who cultivate, grow, farm, and tend after the production of oil and wine, but they are restricted from consuming them. So that's how I came to understand the context and had to make sure what the pair of balances was and verify the correct usage of this word. And I forewarn you, you are in a ride for a big surprise. The word for the pair of balances in original Greek is zugos, the Strong's number G2218. The meaning of this word zugos is a yoke that is put on draught cattle. And this is the very same yoke that Jesus used when he said, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." The yoke is put on the cattle to take control over the animal's behavior and direction. Therefore, its meaning is metaphorically used of any burden or bondage as that of slavery. And then, zugos has a secondary meaning for balance, or a pair of scales. Now, this word zugos is used 6 times in New Testament, and let us examine how it is translated in the KJV Bible. First in Matthew 11:29, "Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls." Which meaning of the yoke is used here? It is the simple yoke, an instrument put on the draught cattle, right? And Matthew 11:30, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." This is also the same yoke as before. Acts 15:10, "Now therefore why tempt ye God to put a yoke upon the neck of the disciples, which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear?" This too is a yoke, metaphorically referring to the burden and bondage of the laws of Moses. Galatians 5:1, "Stand fast therefore in the liberty wherein Christ has made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage." This too is same as above. The yoke here is of bondage entangling man's liberty, in this case our liberty in Jesus Christ. Continuing on, 1 Timothy 6:1, "Let as many servants as are under the yoke count their own masters worthy of all honor, that the name of God and his doctrine be not blasphemed." Here too is a simple yoke to mean the bondage and slavery of man. And we said that this word zugos was used 6 times in the New Testament in all, and in all 5 places, they were used and translated simply zugos, the yoke. Only one time in this passage in Revelation, it was translated as a pair of balances in the Bible. There may be people who throw a fit and go berserk about KJV being wrong in any way, but in my opinion, this is a clear mistranslation. In retrospect, zugos was probably mistranslated into a pair of balances because the translators understood the passage to be a famine relating to the prices of grains in the following verse. Now that we know that this pair of balances is actually a yoke, this might be referring to slavery or bondage system. Because verse 5 would actually read, "And I beheld, and lo, a black horse, and he that sat on him had a yoke in his hand." And remember, the seals occur in centurial intervals, and they have lasting effects. Once a seal is opened, its artifacts and cultural remains tend to continue for a long time, often to this date. For example, all kinds of slavery exists to this date. Sex trafficking, plantation slavery, child labor, minors, you name it. But is this interpretation correct? Probably not, for the reason we'll discuss next. But in the meantime, we can confirm that the 3rd seal is not slavery by examining the history of slavery. Living in an information age, we can look up pretty much any information we need and confirm it. And as we see here, in this possibly the 20 worst things people have done to each other, we can find the selected death tolls for wars, massacres, and atrocities before the 20th century, with time period when it happened. And in the top 10 list, the 8th we have the Mid-East slave trade that caused 18.5 million dead. We have the World War II on the top of the list with 66 million dead, and we have the Genghis Khan ranked number 3 with 40 million dead, as we already talked about it in the 4th seal. And we see the Taiping Rebellion ranked number 6, which relates to the time Hudson Taylor went to China for missions that we'll discuss in the Great Multitude between the 6th and the 7th seals. Anyways, we speculate that the death toll for the upcoming World War III will top everything in this list with a minimum 66.6 million dead, and by that time, we will know for sure what time we are living in. Anyways, the Middle East slave trade, or the slavery in the Islamic world, dates from the 7th century in 650 Common Era. The number of slaves traded up to year 1600 tallies up to 7.22 million plus, nearly 1 million shipped in the 17th century, 1.3 million shipped in 18th century, and 2 million in the 19th century, totaling 11.5 million in all that are recorded for historical review. History of slavery in Africa also dates back as early as year 650, let alone the Babylonian and Egyptian slavery before Christ, meaning the interpretation of the third seal cannot be the simple slavery or bondage system, because it does not fit with the timeline with the rest of the events. So if we look at the timeline for the 7 seals in the Revelation, first we had the papacy shaping up in 217 at the opening of the first seal. Then, without having to guess anything for the second seal, if you are to put down Arab or African slave trade for the third seal, then the dating of this event from 650 to 1800s just seems to not fit with the rest of the findings. Not only is the slave trade hard to reference the exact start date or finish date, the intervals between the seals is thrown out of order. With the Genghis Khan in 1206 at the fourth seal, there's 556 years interval gap from the start of the third seal to the start of the fourth seal. From the opening of the fourth seal to the fifth seal, we have 318 years interval. The fifth to sixth seals have 231 year gap, and then 153 years when the last seal opens. So the trend for the intervals between the seals is shortening like the birth pangs of travailing women. But the slave trade in the third seal leaves almost no room for the second seal between the first and the third seals. So I had a hunch that the third seal must be some other event or more specific historical account occurring later than the usual slave trade. Come to think of it, would slaves be paying money for their own food? And would you even bother to set the market price for slaves or give proper warnings? I thought they wouldn't be so. Slaves are abused of labor without any pay or food, and at most of the times, it was the slave's responsibility to make sure they don't starve to death. Slaves are likely tied up in confined spaces without freedom to travel, trade, or own properties. So one wouldn't expect slaves to store cash for themselves anyways, and it becomes clear that the descriptions in Revelation 6:6 or the third seal might not be about the slavery at all, or it does not pertain to the ordinary slavery system, to say the least. So next, I looked into how much a measure of wheat for a penny and 3 measures of barley for a penny. As we said before, the word penny is originally denarian, which stands for a day's wage. Even Jesus, when he spoke in parable, said in Matthew 22 that he had agreed with the laborers for a penny a day and sent them into his vineyard. And the word measure is originally koinix, which is a unit for less than a quart, which is about 1 liter. This means that a laborer would work all day to earn 1 liter of wheat. Then how much does an ordinary person, call it freeman, earn with this denarius? According to the commentary on the Old and New Testaments by Robert Jamieson, A.R. Fawcett, and David Brown, a measure is about a day's provision of wheat, variously estimated at 2 or 3 pints, and for a penny or denarius, which is about 8.5 pence of our money, signifies probably the day's wages of a laborer. And it comments that ordinarily from 16 to 20 measures were given for a denarius. And according to Albert Barnes' notes on the Bible, a measure of wheat for a penny would be about 8 times as dear as ordinary. These commentaries seem to match in their insights, because if from 16 to 20 measures were ordinarily given for a denarius, but your portion is now reduced to 1 to 3 measures only, then it would mean that you are being cheated 5 to 20 times over. And other commentaries also remarked, the author's emphasis on the denarius as the cost of a liter of wheat and 3 liters of barley presupposes that this amount represents a daily wage for an average worker. The normal cost for a koinix of wheat was about 1/8 of a Greek denarius, or 2 Roman asses, while barley was about half the cost of wheat, therefore 1/16 of Greek denarius, or 1 Roman ass. In other words, It remarks that the price corresponds to about 8 to 16 times the normal price range. So we know that it is not famine, because during the Great Famine of 1315 in the fourth seal in Lorraine, France, the wheat prices increased by 320%, but what is described in the third seal is the price increase of 800% to 1600%, which must be different from that of the famine. Therefore, it is not famine, and if it's not slavery, then what is it? The event probably relates to some kind of labor abuse. So the search for the historical labor exploitation began, and when we were examining the medieval history of Europe, we landed on the feudalism and serfdom. In medieval Europe, there was something called the manorialism, which was an essential element of feudal society. Under the jurisdiction of each manor, or fief, there were a lord of manor and his legal subjects, who are the peasants that paid obligatory dues and contributions. Manors were made up of 3 different classes of lands, which are the demesne, directly controlled by the lord of the manor, dependent land, held and serviced by the serfs who had obligation to the manorial customs, and the free peasant land, though it may be subject to pay rent. What we must pay attention to is the serfdom, because the serfs are legally contracted to serve the estate of the feudal lord, consisting the lower social class in the Middle Ages. The status of peasants, specifically relating to the manorialism, was a condition of bondage or modified slavery. Do you notice this word bondage in Wikipedia to describe the modified slavery? Isn't it eerie that the word zugos accurately captures the whole concept of serfdom? The manor formed the basic unit of society, and the lord of manor and his serfs were bound legally, economically, and socially. But they are different from common slaves because they had certain freedom. Serfs were defined as people in whose labor landowners held property rights. And serfdom involved not only work in the lord's fields, but his mines, forests, and roads. Feudalism spread through Europe around 10th century. It flourished in Europe during the Middle Ages, but lasted until 19th century in some countries. Although the decline of serfdom has sometimes been attributed to the Black Death, which reached Europe in 1347, the decline had begun even before that date. Isn't it amazing how these statements all coincide with what we have already covered in the series of the lectures on the 7 seals? The serfdom came about from an opening of the 3rd seal, but it declined before the 4th seal had opened, although the phenomenon as the later serfdom featured long after it has first surfaced in 10th century until the modern days. The word serf originated from the Old French and can be traced back further to the Latin servus, meaning slave. The term serfdom was coined in 1850. When a freeman were to become serf to a local magnate, it required a certain procedure. Look what it says. Their bargains were formalized in a ceremony known as bondage, zugos, in which the serf placed his head in the lord's hands, akin to the ceremony of homage, where a vassal placed his hands between those of his overlord. These oaths bound the lord and his new serf in a feudal contract and defined the terms of their agreement. Often these bargains were severe. To become a serf was a commitment that encompassed all aspects of the serf's life. Moreover, the condition of serfdom was inherited at birth. By taking on duties of serfdom, serfs bound not only themselves but all of their future progeny. What were the duties of the serfs? The usual serf paid his fees and taxes in the form of seasonal appropriate labor. Usually a portion a week was devoted to plowing his lord's fields held in demesne, and the residue of serf's time was devoted to tending his own fields. In addition to service, a serf was required to pay certain taxes and fees. Taxes were based on assessed value of his lands and holdings. Fees were usually paid in the form of agricultural produce rather than cash. The best ration of wheat from the serf's harvest often went to the landlord. When a family member died, extra taxes were paid to the lord as a form of feudal relief to enable the heir to keep the right to till what land he had. Any young woman who wished to marry a serf outside of her manor was forced to pay a fee for the right to leave her lord, and in compensation for her lost labor. A serf could grow what crop he saw fit on his lands, although the serf's taxes often had to be paid in wheat. The surplus he would sell at the market. So we can see that the serf was somewhat different from a normal slaves, where they had some freedoms and rights. So, how did feudalism come about? From etymological perspective, the term feudal or feudal is derived from the medieval Latin word feudum. The etymology of the feudum is complex with multiple theories, but the most widely held view is that the word has a Germanic origin. Historically, the feudalism usually emerged as a result of the decentralization of the empire. As the Germanic kingdom succeeded Roman authority in the West in the 5th century, Roman landlords were often simply replaced by Gothic or Germanic ones, with little change to the underlying situation or displacement of populations. So we can see how the word feudal originated from Germany, which is north to the Mediterranean basin. The process of rural self-sufficiency was given an abrupt boost in the 8th century when normal trade in the Mediterranean Sea was disrupted. Feudalism spread in Europe at about 10th century. Now, how did feudalism develop in Europe? Romans in Europe returned to their homeland, leaving Europeans' lands without organizations and system of Roman centralization. The disintegration of Europe following the departure and power of the Romans slowly led to European feudalism. The first elements of European feudalism appeared in France and Germany in the 9th and 10th centuries. This coincides with the great military force organized by the Normans, and the elements of the Roman regime were transferred to European feudalism. Roman villas and their lands were granted to military leaders on temporary basis as a reward for their loyalty to Rome and the emperor. It was also traditional for Romans to surround themselves with loyal soldiers who provided a substantial fighting force and offered protection. These ideas were adopted in Europe. European nobles increased their power from grants of lands from the king in return for their military service. This is how the European feudalism was born. Then, how about the food in the Middle Ages? Bread was the basic food in the Middle Ages. Bread could be made with barley, rye, and wheat. Flour made from the castle was ground at the lord's own mill by his miller. Millers produced different kinds of flour, fine, to make white bread for the king or lord, and brown bread for the servants. Barley, oat, and rye among the poor, and wheat for the governing classes were eaten as bread. And now we have the glimpse of understanding as to why Revelation 6:6 writes, "A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny." The Bible is revealing to us that barley is more precious than the wheat. Meat was more expensive and therefore more prestigious, and in the form of game was common only on the tables of the nobility and the poachers. Meats were pork and chicken and other domestic fowl. Beef, which required greater investment in land, was less common. Slow transportation and inefficient food preservation techniques, drying, salting, smoking, and pickling, made long-distance trade of many foods expensive. Because of this, the food of the nobility was more prone to the foreign influence than the cuisine of the poor, and dependent on exotic spices and expensive imports. Sumptuary laws limited the conspicuous consumption among the nouveau riche. Social norms also dictated that the food of the working class be less refined. A type of refined cooking developed in the late Middle Ages that set the standard among the nobility all over Europe. Common seasonings in the highly spiced sweet-sour repertory typical of upper-class medieval food included verjuice, wine, and vinegar in combination with spices. The cuisines of the cultures of the Mediterranean basin had since antiquity been based on cereals, particularly various types of wheat. Dependence on wheat remained significant throughout the medieval era and spread northwards. In colder climates, wheat was usually unaffordable for most people and was associated with higher classes. Only olive oil and wine had comparable value, but both remained exclusive outside the warmer wine and olive growing regions. Aha! Now we have the basis for understanding what it means by not to hurt the oil and the wine. Both the olive oil and wine remained exclusive for the higher classes in colder climates. In the British Isles, northern France and Low Countries, the northern German-speaking areas, the Scandinavia and the Baltic, the climate was generally too harsh for the cultivation of grapes and olives. In the south, wine was the common drink for both rich and poor alike, though the commoner usually had to settle for the cheap, second-pressing wine. Beer was the commoner's drink in the north, and wine an expensive import. Citrus fruits, though not the kinds most common today, and pomegranates were common around the Mediterranean. Olive oil was a ubiquitous ingredient around the Mediterranean, but remained an expensive import in the north, where oil of poppy, walnut, hazel, and filbert was the most affordable alternative. So let us put all things together and interpret the third seal. A measure of wheat for a penny and 3 measures of barley for a penny in Revelation 6:6 means that the barley was more precious than wheat, and that the poor lower class consumed wheat over barley, which was more affordable. Hurt not the oil and wine in Revelation 6:6 means that in the north, outside of Mediterranean basin, the olive oil and wine were expensive imports that only the noble class can enjoy. Therefore, the serfs of the lower class were not allowed to consume these delicacies. However, in the southern regions, the serfs could drink cheap second-pressed wine. It should be also noted that the olive oil and wine are produced from the olives and grapes, and let us be reminded the Bible does not write, "Hurt not the olives and grapes," but writes, "Hurt not the oil and the wine." This implies the existence of different classes of rich noble and the poor serfs, rather than referring to some kind of famine. And what relevance does serfdom and feudalism have today? If the seals are characterized by its continuous residual effects on future generations, then what impact did serfdom and feudalism have on our lives? You're well aware of Karl Marx. Well, he wrote in his book Capital, the economic structure of capitalistic society has grown out of the economic structure of feudal society. The dissolution of latter set free the elements of the former. What is he saying? The very capitalism and its economic framework for labor exploitation has come out of the feudalism. Karl Marx continues on by saying, the starting point of the development that gave rise to the wage laborer as well as the capitalist was the servitude of the laborer. The advance consisted in the change of form of this servitude in the transformation of feudal exploitation into capitalist exploitation. This argument about the development of the capitalism may be of Karl Marx's personal opinion, but one cannot deny that the labor exploitation is part of our reality. The majorities of the laborers today around the globe are working long hours only to make ends meet. This is why I believe Bible makes special note about heaping wealth in the last days and about the labor exploitation that will be brought to justice when the Lord returns. It writes in James chapter 5, "Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver are cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days. Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. You have lived in pleasure on the earth, and been wanton. Ye have nourished your hearts, as in the day of slaughter. Ye have condemned and killed the just, and he does not resist you. Be patient therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, and has long patience for it, until he receive the early and the latter rain. Be ye also patient, stabilize your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. Grudge not one against another, brethren, lest ye be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth before the door." So, how shall we summarize the interpretation of a third seal? Zugos, appearing in Revelation 6:5, is not a pair of balance, but should be translated a yoke, meaning the bondage of slavery. Therefore, the descriptions of the passage refer to the serfdom, zugos, under manorialism that started in the 10th century. The economic structure of the feudalistic labor exploitation of the serfdom has transitioned into the capitalism of today's world that continues to impact our society